Hey you all. So I'm recording this video to move on the subject of interdiscourse and memory, which was left in our last class. I apologize for the delay in recording the video, but I had lots of tasks with the other subjects I teach. But anyway, uh, I'm moving now to the slides and finish this subject in the New Orleans Discourse Analysis Fundamentals and Procedures. So when we talk about the notion of interdiscourse and memory, when we say interdiscourse, we refer to the path of discourse. If we remember what Orlando says, she says that discurso, língua em curso. So when discourse moves, it leaves a path that you can reconstruct, or reconstruct is not a very good word, but you can find clues of its construction process by means of these paths uh, that will normally refer back to some discursive memory. So we consider that discourse is always moving historically and socially in language. And we use other people's words in our own context. So we use words that existed before us, but we give them new sense effects when we bring these words that belong to the past and we make them actual. We make them, uh, we utter them at the present time. So this is because our language is not exclusively ours. It is ours for sure, but it belonged to others that come before us, and it will belong to others that will come after us. So language is constructed among our conditions of production, and depending on changes, slight or abrupt changes in conditions of production, meaning effects, sense effects may differ slightly or greatly. So if we ask someone, for example, from another generation about the meaning of a particular word, it can take on a different meaning than what we are used to. Some historical events, for example, I mentioned the case of Primavera. Primavera de Praga is not as Primavera is not the same as Primavera Árabe, the Arab Spring, but they all bring this idea of something flourishing, a new social order that is coming on. Uh, but if we take the case of the Prague Spring, we refer to a movement of the left wing portions of society. And if we talk about the so-called Brazilian Spring of June 2013, we are talking about a movement that gave origin to conservative movements in Brazil as a reaction for the established powers at that time. So I mentioned here some examples like Fora Collor, that is now recalled. It was recalled with the Fora Temer, Fora Bolsonaro. These Fora Temer, Fora Bolsonaro refer back to Fora Collor because it was a successful movement of asking for social change. The same for Arab Spring, as I mentioned, and so on. These terms bring along their conditions of production. They do not mean on their own. So every time I move the sense effects of spring, I use this term according to the conditions of production of that time, but also referring back to times before us. So interdiscourse is exactly that association between words and the sense effects that they activate in memory. So when we talk about direta já in a context of Brazil 2020, we are referring back and recovering some sense effects that this naming of a political process bring from 1980s, if you get what I mean. So they refer not only to an adjective associated with an adverb, but to a discourse event. A discursive event is the one that installs a new set of possible interpretations of reality. For example, the June protests in Brazil 2013, that we know as Jornadas de Junho, they install new topics in politics. They they inaugurate a debate on the role of state, some claiming on a more statist view uh, of the state interfering more in the markets, and there was a reaction of a liberal point of view of the state in being more absent of these questions and letting citizens free to regulate themselves, let the market regulate everything. So when we install, for example, Jornadas de Junho was a movement that was in the mouths and in the ears of every citizen in Brazil, even after 2013, because they claim to have something called voz das ruas that should be heard, and every politician, either from the left wing or right wing or the center, would say that it's important to listen to this voice, but this voice is interpreted differently depending on the ideological positioning and the conditions of production for understanding, for creating an interpretation of these reivindications. So uh, memory, as we know, this memory in language, it's not individual, it's a collective memory, it's a social memory, it has a social dimension. So when we talk about 1964 in Brazil, we have a social construction of what it was. Of course, we have a a dispute of hegemony over if it was good or if it was bad. But we all know we are talking about a political movement that some call revolution and some call the military coup, and even the differences in naming will produce different sense effects. So all these terms like fascism, direta já, mensalão, jornadas de junho, just to stick to political discourse, or for example, social constructivism in pedagogical discourse, all these names, they activate a collective memory in a web of meanings. So it's not just one meaning, it's a web of meanings coming from diverse areas of study that get interconnected. So we acquire our ideas through language. And consequently, we also acquire at least part of the ideology of this language. Since this language is social, language is the support for a society's ideology, or speaking in the plural, language is the material support for a set of ideological aspects of a society. So even the idea of text re, uh, refers back to the idea of texture, a tissue, a web that is interconnected, a set of words that are in a relationship with each other, constructing what we usually call meaning or sense effects by this interconnection of various discourses. Like this, I have, let's suppose, the discourse of economy, the discourse of medicine, the discourse of science in general, like physics, chemistry, the discourse of philosophy, and at some points they get interconnected. Okay, so for example, when we discuss now the case of the vaccine, it should be scientifically proved, but it should be economically possible, it should be logistically possible. So there are points of interconnections of three or more discourses. So the text and text interpretation, text can only be interpreted within this web of knowledge, of fields of knowledge, of disciplinary knowledge that we have established in our society. So everything is connected, like in the web. Okay. And what is memory? Well, since we are born in language, language was already there on our arrival and will continue to be there after us. So we use the same words as our grandparents or our grandparents. Of course, some words were lost in time, but most of them are, they have more than 2 or 3 centuries, but they acquire different meanings. So we use the same words as our grandparents, but to provide different meanings that they didn't have because of the lack of technological advance that we now have. So we have to name technological devices, and we name them based on words that previously existed. Or sometimes we borrow from another culture, like from English. But I'm sorry about that. Bia came to attend the class. Sorry, it was my cat. So as I was saying, uh, we can attribute new meanings for words as conditions of production change. However, the old senses are still recoverable. They may not be still used with that frequency, but we can recover them. And that's the historical aspect of language. So, by means of a piece of discourse, by means of some utterance, you can reconstruct history behind that discourse, ideology behind that piece of discourse. So, this is what we call discursive memory. Discursive memory does not belong to an individual. Discursive memory is collective, it is social, it is also historical, of course, it's memory, but it's social memory. So it is a set of organized pieces of discourse that get connected. An example of this could be academic discourse, which recalls discursive formations, for example, of authorship. When we produce an academic paper, we invest in the notion of author and authority, although we have seen that this is a problematic notion in Foucault. Uh, we invest in the notion of clarity, even to write papers on discourse analysis that claim that language is not transparent, language is not obvious, language is opaque, but we invest in the fact that we self constitute as we are being clear. I have to self constitute that I'm being clear in what I say in this piece of theory so that you can understand me. But I can never assure that you will fully understand me as I would like you to. But we invest in that. It has to do with the two oblivions that Orlando talks about. I have to forget the fact that I'm not the source of my saying, and I have to forget that what I say can be said in another way. So I invest in the fact that what I'm saying here is being said the best way possible. And I have to invest in the fact that what I say is somehow original and will touch you in an original way. Okay. So the discourse is on teaching, for example, what should a teacher be? A teacher should be didactic, a teacher should be clear in what he says, and so on. So this has a lot to do with Foucault's forbidden word. It is what is expected to be said to be associated to an area of knowledge or social practice. So a teacher should behave like a teacher, a politician should behave like a politician with the vocabulary of a politician. Of course, we have seen some breaks in this behavior, like people speaking, politicians speaking from a certain ethos that they are not supposed to. Well, we are in a moment of social of great social change. So some areas of knowledge are being reorganized. But anyway, there is a kind of how can I say? There is a kind of prescription on how each member of each area of society or of knowledge should behave. There is a liturgia, yeah, that should be followed. So a teacher is not supposed to bring you here like beliefs, but scientific knowledge. Knowledge and beliefs are different instances of human culture. So within a discursive formation, there are regulations on what can and can't be said. I can't speak about medicine because I do not have the authority. I do not follow the rules. I do not even know the rules of medical discourse. A doctor, someone from the medical area, or a nurse can never talk about language from the same position as I do, because he or she does not have gone through the rituals of authorization that are necessary to be an authority. Okay, so there is a way of saying, and consequently there is a way of doing. So when you read the text, for example, and you feel it's difficult for you, it's because you probably do not belong to that area of knowledge, or you cannot reconstruct that historical moment. For example, reading Machado de Assis is not a very easy task if you don't know a lot about Brazilian history. Reading the Indigenistas would not be easy for someone that is from outside the country and does not know anything about Brazil. So you have to recover that society. You have to go back in history and see what were the conditions of production for this piece of discourse. How can I understand this discourse from the perspective of this historical moment, of these conditions of production, of this and that social stratification? So the text, in fact, is not difficult for everyone. It will affect you as something difficult because you do not share history, the target audience, and so on. So what we have agreed to call meaning is, in fact, the effect of our interaction with texts. When we interact with texts, we produce meaning according to our own conditions of production. Or if you are an effective reader with good historical knowledge, social knowledge, you reconstruct, you emulate that position, that social and historical position, to try to produce a meaning closest as possible to the sense effects produced by that society that was the target public. So, uh, meaning or sense effects are mediated by ideology. Now, what is ideology? Take a look at this glass here on the slide. Uh, if you look at this glass, you see a pen inside a glass of water. And let's consider the image from the glass down. Let me make a cut here. Like this. From this point down, if I have an observer here, the observer will see that this pen is completely straight. An observer inside here, in another point, would see this pen above him or her. Okay, these are people. Okay, believe me, these are two different people. So they will have different points of view, but even so, both of them, when looking at this object, will see it's a straight object. Now, if possible, which we will discuss later, if someone could look at this object from this point of view here and look at the object, the person would probably see a distortion effect. It would see this pen like being broken. Why? Because of an effect, an optical illusion that water produces that we call refraction. So now call the water ideology. Let's put an I for ideology. Consider water as ideology and consider the pen as meaning. If there was a space, if there was a positioning outside ideology, I could see all possible meanings and the distortions in meaning caused by ideology. But since Luis Althusser says that there is no outside ideology, we can only see from perspectives from this red straight down. We can only see we are all inside the glass. And what we look at will always look as a straight object, which in fact is straight, but with some distortions. But we don't even realize the distortions because ideology, I wouldn't say it makes us blind, but ideology causes us an interpretative effect of refraction, but we do not have access to the original image. It's like ideology was a pair of glasses that you were born with and that you can never take off. You will never get rid of your ideology. You can for sure acquire or uh, emulate other ideologies, but yours will always be there. So it's superposed. Okay? Take a look at the rainbow here. Okay? The rainbow does not really exist. Oh, but the rainbow is there. Yes, but you may walk, 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 and you never get to the rainbow because the rainbow is not meaning. The rainbow is meaning effect. Now, consider that white light from the sun is intended meaning by the speaker. Let's put it this way. But what you hear, what you interpret, is not white light, because what is said passes through ideology and produces sense effects, different colors, different nuances that each subject will interpret according to his or her own conditions of production for meaning. So we do not talk about meaning. We talk about sense effect in discourse analysis. So meaning is never guaranteed. Meaning is never obvious. Meaning is never the same. What the president said can mean something to me, sorry, but can mean something else to another one, and can mean something else to another one. Of course, these meanings are related. They can be slightly different. Sometimes they can be diametral differently, but there will be a difference for sure. If it's a big difference or a small difference, if it's like meaning or meaning one is not that different from meaning zero, but it's another way of attributing meaning for an utterance. We do not talk about sentence anymore. We talk about utterance. Look at the prisma. The prisma. It's the same case. This is effect. This is the real thing. It has a lot to do with Plato's philosophy of the ideal world and the real world. So this is real world here. Okay, the effect, the sense effect. This is ideal world according to Plato. Okay, the imaginary world in which everything is obvious, in which every meaning is guaranteed. Now, call the prisma ideology. So ideology can be this glass of water, can be the atmosphere, and can be the prism. I think the idea of the atmosphere is good because we all live in the planet. We will never see white light. We will only see the rainbow. We see the earth is blue, but the earth is not really blue. Being blue is a refraction effect of sunlight over Earth's atmosphere. So that's my point. Seeing the earth blue is sense effect. Seeing the distorted pen, seeing the straight pen, sorry, is sense effect. We would only see it distorted if there was, but there is not, an outside ideology. At least I'm sticking to Althusser's point of view on ideology, and he says there is no subject, there is no human being without an ideology, because there is no human being without a language. And language is the material support for ideology. Even gestures, even paintings, they are a material support for ideology. Okay? So we are talking about the refraction effect of ideology on meaning production. Meaning is constructed socially by means of the ideology of a society, of an era, a certain historical moment, of a class stratification, of an identitarian stratification. The meaning of racism for a black person may differ from the meaning of racism for a white person. And we have seen this discussion now with the Black Lives Matter movement. We have seen this discussion now when we say Black Lives Matter and some people say all lives matter. Saying Black Lives Matter may affect black population in a certain way and may affect white population in a different way, and may affect black population with no consciousness, no awareness of race fighting, race social rights in a certain way, and those who have this identification with social rights in another different way. So some black people that do not identify with the black movement would have an interpretation closer to the white person that believes racism does not exist than with the black brother. You see what I mean? The white person that admits that racism is structural in Brazil tends to have a closer interpretation of Black Lives Matter uh, with a black conscious citizen that is a kind of militant of black movement than with the black person that is not involved in social reivindication. Okay, meaning is never meaning. Meaning is meaning one, meaning two, meaning three, meaning four, meaning many meanings, all possible meanings according to the conditions of production. Okay, if you have any question about this, just post your question on the comments and I will happily answer. So, for example, take this case. I think, therefore I am, said René Descartes. Now, Jacques Lacan said, it's where I don't think, there I am. Discourse analysis brings this notion of refraction of sense effects to the notion of the unconscious. It's in the unconscious that we really are. And language is the place for revealing, or not revealing is not a very good word, but for leaving clues of the unconscious processes in the human mind and in human societies. So uh, it's the case of noun and the pronoun to grammar, for example. The noun never changes. Zeuchoa, it's me, although I may have homonyms, okay? But in the classroom, if somebody says Uchoa, that's me, all right. But when I use you can be many people. You can be Antonio, you can be João, you can be Pedro. Depends on where I'm looking at. Depends on who are those people inside the classroom. So the pronoun is ever changing, is variable, whereas the noun changes. The noun is less opaque than the pronoun. And using a noun or using a pronoun may cause different sense effects. So our identities, they work similarly to pronouns. Why? Because we have fragmented identities. We are never the same. Descartes, when he said, I think, therefore I am, this subject of Descartes' philosophy is completely conscious of himself or herself, is completely under the control of all the situations, of what he says, of what he does. Now, the subject to Lacan has a dimension of the unconscious. So, depending on who we are interacting with, we take an identity which is appropriate to that situation, and we don't take many others. It's like, let's take my case. Here, I'm speaking from the position of a professor, but with my colleagues, I speak from the position of a colleague. With my mother, I speak from the position of a son, and there is a different repertoire to follow. There's a different vocabulary, a different voice intonation, different meanings are possible. Some words are taboos in my family, but are not taboos in the academy. Some words are taboos in the academy, but are not in my family. You know what I mean? So we assume these identities based on a position given by discourse. So discourse, the academic discourse, authorizes me to speak in this video from the position, from a place of subject, which in Orlando calls posição de sujeito. Some people call lugar de fala. It's in vogue nowadays to speak about lugar de fala, but the technical term, in fact, is posição de sujeito, place of subject, okay? I speak from this position that is authorized by the institution, that is authorized by the conditions of production, that is authorized for my skin color or for my sexual orientation or whatever, depends on the subject, that is authorized by the era, by history, by my social class to speak. So I cannot speak everything at any time uh, because it has implications of the authorization or authorization. Okay, so we are all subjective, or being subjective or being a subject means to be conducted, means to be guided, means to be limited by the context. Subject, sujeito, assujeitado. So we are not under control, as Descartes claimed. Eu penso, logo existo. I think, therefore I am. I'm completely rational. What I say is what I do. I'm responsible for what I do. This is the juridical subject. In court, unless people prove you have a you are mentally affected, what you do and what you say can be used in your favor or against you. But according to discursive linguistics, what you do and what you say talks about you, but it's not really you. When you speak, there's the voice of your grandparents behind you, your parents, your classmates, your colleagues at work, and your social class, your skin color. Many aspects, many identities are flowing together in the flow of your discourse. So our identities are built inside and through language. So it doesn't make much sense to speak of one identity. This is my identity. Instead, I say I have some identities in the plural. And just as words acquire meaning through interaction, our identities are also constituted in the relationship with the other. So it's the other and the kind of dialogue that is established, even if it's not a dialogue, because if I speak something, someone is supposed to interact with, these words will produce a self-image, and the image that the other makes about me and my image is affected by the image of the other. So the other not necessarily is another person, but it's a context. It's a context of our society, history, our profession, our nationality, and so on. If you have problems understanding this, I'd suggest you to go back in the video and maybe ask some questions in the comments or through email. So just as meanings change in history, so do identities. Identities and meanings are, to the same extent, historical and ideologically determined. Okay? So I hope with this I can finish Orlando's discussion. Okay? Uh, and I hope you are able to do your assignments. Um, And thank you very much for this semester. It was very nice, and we can arrange a meeting. I mean, maybe by January, when we all have this Christmas thing and uh, New Year's thing. But I'm expecting your assignments for the 18th. Okay, if in the 18th you want to come to a video conference, I'll not be at home anymore, but I'll be there to talk to you. Okay, I'm always available on my email, so please let me know if you have any question, and uh, do a nice job according to the two proposals I have suggested you to do. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for the delay. I'm also making available a lecture because we used some ideas of subjectivity and language and the unconscious. So I'm also making available a lecture from Professor Débora Damasceno from Escola de Psicanálise de São Paulo. It's on my YouTube channel. I'm putting the link in Siga. I strongly suggest you, if you want to go deeper in the subject, to take a look at her lecture. It was very interesting. She gave this lecture during the special period of holidays. Uh, what we call curso de férias. Yeah, she talked to my language, culture, and identity group. Okay, so I hope you enjoy it. Okay, have a nice holidays, a nice Christmas, a very good New Year. We hope. I wish that this pandemic is over soon and we'll be vaccinated and we can all get in touch again there in CCH and talk to each other, look inside the eyes, exchange hugs and kisses and smiles. Uh, for now, it's what we have to do is these classes on Google Meet. Uh, it's not the kind of thing that I like to do, but this is the possible way. I hope you enjoyed the course. Okay, if you want to write me something like criticize or suggest something for the next semester, the next term, for the groups to come, I would appreciate your suggestions, your comments. Okay, thank you very much. See ya.